My late husband's parents, who favored his brother all his life, show up at his funeral, then have the audacity to demand his business and our home. I'm a 44-year-old woman who recently lost my husband, who was 48. We spent 20 years together and were married for 12. 5 years ago, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and just a few weeks ago, he passed away. Although I miss him deeply and know that my life will never be the same, I've made peace with his passing. I'll always love him more than words can say, and I doubt I'll ever feel that kind of love again. Still, he suffered greatly in his last month, so there's some relief knowing he's finally at peace. We held his funeral service last week, and to my surprise, his parents attended. My husband hadn't spoken to them in 8 years, and their relationship had been strained for a long time. He had cut ties with them, vowing never to talk to them again. Given the history, I wasn't expecting to see them there at all. The root of the issue was that his parents had always favored his older brother, Jack, who's now 50. Jack has struggled with alcoholism and never really managed to get his life together, yet his parents always preferred him over my husband, regardless of my husband's efforts. This unfair favoritism weighed heavily on him, but he still tried to be there for his family. He was a loving, family-oriented person, but his parents never truly valued him. When we started dating, I began to see how differently they treated him, and I encouraged him to stand up for himself. Despite my concerns, he'd often brush it off, saying that he didn't want to create conflict within his family. He was incredibly kind, even to those who didn't treat him well. But as our relationship grew, he gradually started setting boundaries. He stopped accepting their poor treatment and began defending himself more often, partly because I kept encouraging him to see his own worth. Over time, he became less tolerant of their behavior. After 3 years together, he had reached a point where he could no longer overlook the way his family treated him. This caused tension as they were so used to taking advantage of his kindness that they couldn't adjust to the changes in him. They noticed that he'd started to assert himself since meeting me, and they resented it. At one point, they even tried to convince him to leave me, blaming me for the distance growing between them. But their interference only strengthened our bond, and we became closer than ever. Looking back, I feel grateful that he chose to prioritize his happiness and well-being with me, despite the challenges he faced with his family. His courage to stand up for himself was one of the things I admired most about him. Although he's no longer here, his strength and the love we shared will always remain with me. Knowing that he's now free from pain brings me some comfort, even though I'll miss him every day. To say my in-laws and I have always had a rocky relationship would be an understatement. I've always felt I was on the right side, while they were constantly disrespectful to both my husband and me. So when they showed up at his funeral with Jack, I was honestly taken aback. The last time we'd interacted, my husband and I had stormed out of their house after a brutal argument, and things had ended on a sour note. After our wedding, we'd gradually been distancing ourselves from his family, so our relationship with them was already strained. Despite this, they invited us to a Christmas gathering, and we decided to go out of courtesy. However, we quickly realized that was a mistake. The entire evening, they couldn't stop talking about how my husband's new business was destined to fail and that he was wasting his time. Their negativity was overwhelming. Afterward, we confronted his parents, asking why they'd been so unsupportive. They responded that they were only trying to help him see reason and should quit copying his brother Jack. Ironically, Jack had only started a similar business after hearing about my husband's plans, not the other way around. Our business dealt with plastic products and recycling, something we'd researched thoroughly, unlike Jack, who hadn't prepared at all. This confrontation spiraled into a huge argument, and we left, deciding to cut ties for good. As expected, Jack's business never took off. He lacked the dedication and work ethic my husband had. He seemed to think he could ride on my husband's hard work, but success doesn't come without effort, and he found that out the hard way. For the next 8 years, we didn't hear from his family. Even when my husband was diagnosed with leukemia, I'm certain they knew but chose not to reach out. When he was in the hospital, they didn't come by once, so seeing them at his funeral caught me off guard. Throughout the service, I avoided them, and only after it ended did they approach me. They attempted a polite conversation, but I wasn't interested in playing along. Keeping a calm demeanor, I told them they were welcome to offer their condolences, but then they would need to leave. I had no desire to talk to them. If I didn't want to interact with them while my husband was alive, I certainly felt even less inclined now that he was gone. I made my position clear and wasn't willing to compromise. They may have shown up at the funeral, but their presence didn't change years of neglect and disrespect. As far as I'm concerned, they'd made their choices long ago. After dropping the pleasantries, my in-laws told me they needed to speak privately. I agreed, but only after everyone had left, explaining that I wanted some time to address them without distractions. I was curious about what they might have to say. Once the guests had gone, I met them outside the venue. Jack had already left, so it was just the two of them and me. They began by saying they debated visiting my husband in the hospital during his final days, but ultimately decided against it, claiming they didn't want to add to his stress, knowing he was already very sick. I found their excuse feeble. If they truly cared, they would have shown up, regardless of how inconvenient it might have seemed. But I wasn't surprised by their reasoning. I cut them off, letting them know I didn't need any justification for their choices and urged them to get to the point. I was exhausted from the day and wasn't in the mood for drawn-out explanations. My bluntness seemed to catch them off guard, but I felt they had it coming. They then shared that they wanted to say their final goodbyes to him, which I acknowledged, but it was clear there was more they wanted to discuss. They finally admitted that they were also interested in whatever he had left behind. I was well aware of their intentions regarding the business. While my husband had built it, I'd been involved in every stage, and we'd worked side by side to make it successful. From the beginning, he'd made sure all the paperwork was organized so that I would take over without any issues. As soon as they brought it up, I firmly stated that there would be no involvement from them, or Jack. My husband had been very clear in his wishes, and I wasn't about to compromise that. After a moment, they shifted the conversation to our property, specifically our home. They explained that, since I didn't have children and the house was quite spacious, they felt it was only fair that they have it. They said they needed it more than I did, implying that I didn't require such a large place for myself. They claimed to be tired of their current home and argued that moving into ours would be a refreshing change. Their plan was to rent out their house for extra income while moving into our property. Their entitlement shocked me. The house wasn't just a property. It was a home my husband and I had poured our hearts into designing together. I couldn't believe they'd have the audacity to ask for it. Their arguments felt opportunistic and shallow, especially given the years they'd spent disregarding us. I held my ground, making it clear that his legacy, including our home, was not up for negotiation. I was stunned by their audacity. After not speaking to us for 8 years, showing up at my husband's funeral and asking for the house we'd built together was beyond offensive. My patience snapped. Grief-stricken and exhausted, I shouted at them to leave. I'd held back my frustrations before, but they were determined to push my limits, and it became a full-blown argument. When I raised my voice, they did the same, accusing me of being disrespectful and inconsiderate. They insisted they'd come only in the name of peace and were appalled by my rude behavior. They even tried to play the age card, telling me I had no respect for my elders. I responded sharply, pointing out that they clearly didn't respect the dead. Here they were, barely after the service, acting like vultures over his estate. Their next move was to threaten me. They warned that since I hadn't agreed to their request, they would take legal action to claim the property. But my husband had been clear in his vow, everything was to go to me. Their threats felt empty because the terms were solid. I assured them they had no chance of winning, even if they pursued a lawsuit. Yet they persisted, blaming me for the estrangement between them and their son. They accused me of manipulating him into cutting them off, a claim that held no truth. They made it clear that, in their minds, I was the reason he hadn't reconciled with them. I told them once more to leave, and after they finally departed, I headed home, angry and emotionally drained. It was only then that I remembered something my husband had prepared. A video message he'd asked me to play for his parents if they showed up at his funeral. In the chaos of the day, it had completely slipped my mind, but I knew that the contents of that message would be significant. About a month before he passed, my husband had recorded that video with my help. I knew every word he had said in it. He'd poured his heart out, explaining his feelings about the estrangement with his parents and expressing his disappointment with their behavior. I knew that sharing this video with them would be painful for them to watch, but he'd felt it was necessary for them to understand the consequences of their actions. At that moment, I decided to take a brief break before reaching out to them again. I needed some time to gather my thoughts and prepare to confront them properly. When I was ready, I would share that video, letting them see for themselves that our situation was their doing, not mine, just as my husband had intended them to realize. A few days after the funeral, I decided it was time to confront my in-laws, Since we'd blocked each other on all platforms, I chose to go directly to their house to share something my husband had left behind for them. They were surprised to see me, but let me in, mostly out of curiosity. I told them my husband had prepared something specifically for them, and though they looked like they wanted to shut the door on me, their curiosity kept them from doing so. We gathered in their living room, and I played the video he had recorded for them. In the video, my husband addressed everything he had experienced with his family over the years. Knowing his parents well, he'd predicted they might come after me for what he'd left behind. So he'd taken legal precautions to protect everything. But this video wasn't about legalities. It was about the emotions he needed them to confront. He spoke about how he'd felt overlooked his entire life, especially as they'd consistently favored his brother, Jack. They'd made no effort to hide their favoritism, always treating Jack as the golden child while he was left in the background. My husband reminded them of specific instances, like back in high school when they refused to contribute toward his college education. Instead, they poured money into Jack's lifestyle, even though he spent most of his time partying. Despite their actions, my husband hadn't said a word against them. He went on to recall how, even when he started his first job, they constantly compared him to Jack, who at that time was earning a bit more due to being 2 years older. It was unfair, but my husband had accepted it without complaint. But the way they dismissed his dreams of starting a business was where he drew the line. They doubted him at every turn, and even when he proved them wrong, they never acknowledged their mistake or apologized. When he received his diagnosis, they didn't reach out, and their silence spoke volumes. In the video, he made it clear that his parents had no right to come to me now, acting entitled to anything he'd left. He stated plainly that he'd left them exactly what they deserved, nothing. He also told them never to contact me again, expressing that he had emotionally cut ties with them long ago. His passing shouldn't mean anything to them, as he felt they hadn't truly been his family for years. He concluded by saying that the only family he'd ever truly had was me. This video was his final message, making it clear that his life and his legacy were not theirs to claim. After the video ended, I left quietly, knowing he'd said everything that needed to be said. The video left me emotional. I had tears in my eyes, not because of what my husband said about his parents, but because of his heartfelt words about me. As for my in-laws, they were speechless by the end of it. After the video finished, I collected myself and told them that if they attempted to take legal action against me, I would simply use this video as proof that my husband had chosen, by his own will, not to leave them anything. His decision stemmed from a lifetime of mistreatment, and they had only themselves to blame for that. It wasn't due to any manipulation on my part, as they had always accused me of. I hope they understood that now. However, instead of accepting it, they turned the blame back on me, accusing me of being a terrible person for showing them the video while they were grieving. They claimed I had deliberately gone out of my way to hurt them with this recording, knowing they were struggling with the loss of their son. They even went so far as to accuse me of doctoring the video, suggesting I'd used editing software to fake their son's words, clinging to any excuse that would help them avoid their guilt. When I replied that I didn't need to prove anything to them, they called me selfish and insisted I didn't deserve anything my husband had left for me. Their accusations were intense, and while I knew my husband had wanted me to follow through with his wishes, I started wondering if I'd done the right thing by playing the video for them. Despite their treatment of my husband, they were still his parents, and maybe in their own way, they felt genuine pain over his passing. It left me conflicted and uncertain. Some of you have asked if I played the video purely out of my own desire for closure or revenge. The truth is, it was partly my decision, but mostly my husband's wish. He'd given me clear instructions to show his parents the video if they ever came after me or tried to claim anything of his. So, I wasn't acting out of pure spite. I was following his final request to protect myself from their demands. To be clear, I didn't go out of my way to hurt them. This was something my husband had explicitly asked me to do, and I respected his wishes. In that sense, it wasn't a decision made entirely on my own. It was as much his intention as it was mine to put his parents in their place if they attempted to overstep boundaries after his passing. Some of you have also been curious about Jack's whereabouts during all of this. Frankly, I have no idea. He wasn't home when I visited, and I'm not sure what he's been up to since. I hope this explanation clears things up and gives you some insight into why I made the decisions I did. Update 1. Thank you all so much for the incredible support in the comments on my previous post. Losing a loved one is always hard, but losing someone as kind-hearted and gentle as my husband has been beyond painful. I know I'll miss him every single day for the rest of my life. It hurts even more when I see people calling him names. I don't understand the point of labeling him as a doormat or pushover. He's no longer here to defend himself or respond, so those words only impact me. And I'm already deeply hurting. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, of course, but speaking negatively about someone who has passed is unnecessary and painful. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd really appreciate it if everyone could refrain from saying those things. That said, I'm incredibly grateful to those who have shown me kindness and support during this time. It's been a week since I visited my in-laws and they haven't reached out to me since. When I left their house that day, they were furious, accusing me of deliberately trying to hurt them or scare them away from contesting the will or filing any lawsuits. Honestly, if they're intent on challenging the will, they can go ahead, but it will likely just be a waste of their time and money. With the video evidence my husband left, I doubt they'll have much of a case. Still, it's up to them if they want to pursue it. I certainly won't stop them. Since that visit, I've kept myself busy, mostly focusing on work to keep my mind off everything. It's hard, but I know I have to manage both my grief and the practical aspects of daily life. Thankfully, I'm not doing this alone. My parents have been incredibly supportive, staying with me for the past few days to help ease the burden. When I come home exhausted from work, they take care of everything around the house. My dad, despite still working himself, has taken over a lot of my husband's usual responsibilities like paying the bills and running errands. I've always been a bit forgetful with these things, so having him handle it has been a relief. My mom has been managing the cooking and cleaning, which has lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. We used to have a housekeeper, but she recently left for personal reasons, so when I mentioned this to my parents, they showed up the very next day with bags in hand ready to help. Their thoughtfulness has been overwhelming, and I'm incredibly thankful for their support. This period has been incredibly challenging, but knowing I have people who genuinely care about my well-being has made it a little easier to keep going. I know I'll have to face more obstacles, especially with the ongoing tension with my in-laws, but right now, I'm focusing on healing and finding my footing in this new reality. Thank you all again for your kindness. It really does make a difference. Update 2. So, my in-laws have decided to contest the will. My husband's lawyer updated me about it, but we're not too worried. Everyone's fairly certain the case will end in my favor. What did surprise me, though, was an email they sent accusing me of using the video to intimidate them. They claimed they were entitled to my husband's assets because he was their flesh and blood before he was my husband. They insisted they deserved not only a share of his property, but also part of the business. Thankfully, courts don't operate based on personal entitlement or feelings. Just because they believe they're owed something doesn't mean it holds up in court. I've saved their email, sent it over to my lawyer, and it will likely help our case. My parents, who have been incredibly supportive, even offered to talk to my in-laws to see if a peaceful resolution could be reached, thinking my in-laws might respect them more. But I assured them there was no need. I'm ready to let my in-laws go through this lawsuit process. I know it's bound to be a waste of their time and resources, and that's fine with me. The past few weeks have been busy, with people stopping by to check in on me or share their condolences since many couldn't attend the service. Between work and visitors, I haven't had much time to really reflect on everything that's happened. About a few days ago, while going through some documents in my husband's office, the weight of his absence hit me. Standing there, I could almost see him in the space, and it made me wish I could just talk to him once more, to tell him how much I love and miss him. But since I can't, I'm learning to let those feelings come and go. Right now, my focus is on making sure our business thrives. He was so driven and passionate about it. He always wanted us to achieve great success together. Thinking about his goals and his unwavering ambition has given me strength and determination. So, I'm pouring my energy into work and doing my best to carry forward his vision. It's the least I can do to honor him, and I know he'd be proud to see me working hard toward the dreams we shared. Update 3. It's been 2 weeks since my in-laws decided to contest the will, and up until now, there hasn't been any progress on their end. But something unexpected happened yesterday that caught me completely off guard. I received a message from Jack. To be honest, I didn't know what to think. Jack and I had never really been close, and considering the situation with his parents, I was surprised he reached out. We weren't exactly on speaking terms, and I couldn't recall any reason why he would contact me now. I hadn't blocked him because I didn't even have his number, but when the message came through, he asked if he could visit me at home to talk. At first, I was hesitant and considered just saying no and blocking him. It felt strange, especially given everything going on. But something in my gut told me there was a reason behind this, and I decided to give it a chance. After all, if he was reaching out, it probably had something to do with my in-law. I agreed to meet him and told him to come over. My parents were going to be home, so I figured it would be fine. When Jack arrived, he brought flowers and offered his condolences. He mentioned that he hadn't been able to express his sympathy at the funeral because things had been so hectic with his parents, but he wanted to make sure I knew he was truly sorry for my loss. I didn't know how to react to this at first. It was surprising, and honestly, it was the first time he had shown any kind of genuine kindness towards me. In the past, when we interacted at his family's house, he always seemed so arrogant and self-centered. But now, sitting in front of me, he was calm and sincere. He didn't have that familiar scent of alcohol on him either, which made me realize he must have cleaned up his act over the years. After a bit of small talk, Jack finally got to the real reason he came over. He told me that his parents were planning to defame me. They intended to spread lies about how my husband had supposedly borrowed money from them to start his business, and that now I was refusing to pay them back. He explained that there was no formal contract, so legally they couldn't do anything, but they were planning to make these false accusations public on social media. It was a ludicrous plan, and I couldn't understand why they thought it would work, but I was grateful Jack came to warn me before it all went public. At least now I could address it before it got out of hand. Jack went on to explain that over the past couple of years, he had been trying to become a better person. He admitted that he had wanted to reach out to us multiple times, but after the way he treated his brother for so long, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He said he was sorry for everything he had done, even though it was probably too late. He started to cry, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. It was awkward, but my father, who had been listening quietly in the other room, came over and comforted Jack. He even made him a cup of tea to help him calm down. I have to admit, I was surprised by how my dad handled the situation. It was a gesture that, while small, seemed to help Jack more than I would have expected. When Jack left, I told him that everything would be okay. I reassured him that I was sure his brother would appreciate the apology, even if it came a little too late. I think that helped Jack feel somewhat better. I'm not sure what will come of this newfound change in him, but at least he acknowledged his mistakes, which is more than I can say for other people in his family, like his parents. To be completely honest, I don't think all the blame lies with Jack. His parents never really supported either of their children the way they should have. They had this misguided belief that by treating Jack as their golden child, they were doing him a favor. But in reality, all they did was spoil him and allow him to grow up without the proper guidance. Now, both Jack and his brother are left dealing with the fallout of their parents' neglect. It's really sad, and I feel for both of them. They deserve better, and I wish they had better parents, but unfortunately, that's not something they can change. In the end, I'm glad Jack came to me. I may not know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure when it comes to him and his actions. At least he came around, and that's more than many others are willing to do. It's a small step, but a step nonetheless. And for now, that's enough for me. Update 4. I had a conversation with my lawyer about what Jack told me, and we decided not to take immediate action. Instead, we would let my in-laws make the social media post, which would give us leverage for the court case. I also spoke to Jack, and he confirmed that he was willing to testify against his parents if necessary. With that sorted, we just had to wait. A few days ago, they finally posted the false claims online, and I wasted no time. I sent them a stern email demanding that they remove it immediately, or we would pursue legal action and file a defamation lawsuit. I had a feeling they might resist, but I expected them to eventually realize they were fighting a losing battle. Adding that Jack was on our side probably didn't help their case. To no one's surprise, they took the post down quickly, but they continued to insist that they were still going to take everything from me. Honestly, it started to feel monotonous, so I simply wished them good luck with that and blocked their email address. At this point, I was done with them. Now they're on their own, and I'm curious to see how they'll handle things without Jack supporting them. They've made their move, and now they'll have to face the consequences alone.